my phone on vibrate.
You got everything okay there?
I just got to put it on vibrate so it don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are live here. Oh. Welcome to the Word I Heard podcast right here on Emmanuel Mennonite's YouTube channel. Is your thing okay?
Yes.
Your volume okay? Yeah,
Yes.
mine's okay too. I think I'll turn it down a little bit. It's been a busy morning. I feel rushed. I don't know why, but I feel rushed. I'm Pastor Derek Hutchison. This is Elder Mark Fisher. We come to you every single week, or every week that we can, and we talk about the sermon that was preached, or the things that were talked about in the sermon the week before. And this last week, I've been looking forward to this one because I was interested. So for those of you who may not be keeping up, or those of you who may not be following, during the time of Lent, we've been doing Women of the Bible, and women of the church have been coming up and sharing a woman of the Bible that inspires them, that they're interested. We've had a lot of great ones. This last week was Fanny Thomas, and she did Rahab. And so after the sermon, or after church, you came up to me and said, Fanny changed my opinion of Rahab.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I really always thought of her as an out-and-out scoundrel because of her background, and
Yeah.
she told it in a way that made me realize that she was put in a situation that she didn't have much say in. And so, being that her father was forced to give her to the king, basically, it was a situation that she made the best of it.
And, you know, a little bit of background, obviously, of Rahab. Rahab, of course, Joshua tells, the Israelites are getting ready. He sends 2 spies down, check out especially Jericho. They end up at Rahab. The king finds out and says, go get these spies, and Rahab hides them on the roof, and she makes a deal with them and says, I've hidden you, you protect my family, because we've heard of you, we heard about the whole Red Sea thing, all of that. And of course they've got the scarlet rope. So many questions come to my mind. And I think this is probably the appropriate place to talk about them. But there's some things that, as I'm reading the story, I'm thinking to myself, okay, similarities of windows. There's a lot of, one of the things that I read was that all of the similarities of different women of the Bible and the window, either sitting at the window or those types of things. So there's the window, there's the tying of the, almost reminiscent of the Passover type of thing. But here's the question that just keeps coming back into my head. We read this story, and I always ask you, or at least during Lent, I've asked you about the women of the Bible, good girl, bad girl. And you've kind of already answered that, the idea of thinking it. But I think we concentrate so much on the story of Rahab that we miss this question. Why did the 2 spies go to the house of a prostitute? Do you think that they knew that she was a prostitute, or that it just happened to be a prostitute? I think that was the first thing that I thought of. Of all the places they could have gone, they end up at the house of a prostitute, and I'm thinking, maybe we let these 2 spies off a little bit in the good boy, bad boy area, and we kind of push all of this stuff on Rahab. But that was the first thing that came to my mind. The other thing that came to my mind was, how many times has God gone or used a woman such as Rahab in the fulfillment of this grand story? Really, the gateway to Israel. I mean, not only as a people, but as a land. Mm-hmm. He uses Rahab. So what do we learn from her? What or what did you learn from her, especially from what Fanny talked about?
She was the right person at the right place at the right time. I mean,
yeah.
And as far as the prostitution part, I wonder if Fanny mentioned that part of what she did was kind of like a motel or an inn, and so,
right.
And in this case, I think they're just looking for a place to hide. So I think she's the first one that came along, and they decided, okay, let's risk it.
Yeah, and no matter you know, our belief is that was God's plan.
Yes.
You know, didn't matter what she did, didn't matter what she was. You know, her being the head of her household. I think I read somewhere that it was her mother or father, maybe her brother and sister and their kids. So, you know, she's the head of the household, running an inn. I mean, we don't want to, we don't want to make it too harsh, and yet we don't want to soften it too much.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, this was God's plan, not only for the spies to succeed, but we can only assume for Rahab to become part of this this nation. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. I want to get your opinion on this. One of the devotionals that I've been using during this time, it's called Women of the Bible, a 1-year devotional study. And in Rahab, for all of the women, it's a very good devotional. It takes you through the entire week of a woman. But in Rahab, with all the women, they start with what was her character, what was her sorrow, what was her joy, and it's the same for every. And this is what it says under her character. Now, the thing that I don't want to do, of course, I've tried to avoid this, even the perception of it. I'm not here to question the women of the Bible. I'm not here to bash the women of the Bible when they do bad. But so this came to my mind, and I wanted to see what you said or what you thought. It says Rahab was clever and wise. She saw judgment coming and was able to devise an escape plan for herself and her family. As soon as she heard what God had done for the Israelites, she cast her lot with his people, risking her life in an act of faith. Do you think that's what it was? Do you think it was an act of faith? Do you think it was an act of faith in God, or just this is my way out? This is how I save my family.
I'm sure there's some desperation there, knowing that they're all going to be slaughtered, seeing a way to be saved. And so there's faith, but I think it was faith based in very desperate times where she knew that otherwise
right.
the family wouldn't survive.
Yeah, and that was the whole thing, because she had said earlier, and we can read it in, if you want to know where the story of Rahab is, go to Joshua 2. And she even says that, the whole idea of, we've heard what's been going on with you people. We heard about the Red Sea, and she even says in Joshua 2, and when we heard you were coming, we trembled with fear. So there was this belief that she had, that God was with them, that God was going to take this land, and they were going to be annihilated. What do you think? I often think about this, especially in the Old Testament. What do you think people thought of people who weren't Israelites, the children of God, what do you think they thought of God? I mean, God, I'm thinking about what she just said. We know you're God, and we know that he's powerful, and we are doomed.
Sure, they saw him as pretty ruthless. I mean, to have a group of people to come in and wipe out all the enemies, and then
Right.
later when they were exiled, they were doing what the people there were doing, and so they kind of became the same as what they were there to annihilate.
Yes, and I don't know if anybody else gets it, but for me, that is a kind of a paradox. That's a strange thing for me when we look closely at these stories. Of course, we know that we're on the winning side. We know that, of course, we have the knowledge of the history of the story, and we know how it plays out. But I think there are people who do struggle with the idea of, let's go back to the Old Testament. You talk about your loving God. Hey, let's talk about this story. You know, the walls came tumbling down. Your God sends your people, his people, into this land, and he annihilates them. What we would call today genocide.
Yes.
And so that's one of the I think one of the hooks people have, or one of the problems that people have, or at least talk to me about, is the idea of your God is a God of genocide. I'll show you, and I can't deny it. That's it's the idea of, so how, what do you say to that?
I'd heard that if the Israelis, the nation of Israel, would have gone into the promised land the first time around, that God was going to basically drive the people out. And so I remember back when I was in college where the teacher said that this happened because they didn't believe in the first place, and so in some ways this was a consequence of disbelief and
of unbelief.
Yeah.
Of just okay, yeah, and and there's all kinds of stories like that, and yes, they're part of the story. One of the things that I don't like is some theology that tries to sugarcoat or change or say, oh, it really didn't, that it happened. It was part of God's plan. It's how it played out. I don't have a better story, nor would I dare to try and trump God's plan. So it's one of the things that we struggle with. Of course, anytime we talk about it in the Old Testament, it's one of the things that we struggle with. And I think the same kind of thinking people try to apply to Rahab is the idea of, this isn't a woman of faith. It's a woman trying to save her family, trying to save her skin, trying to survive when she knows that she's going to die. So she's trading, she's bartering for her life. This isn't a woman of faith. This isn't. And my response to that is, yeah, maybe so, but look at what happened because of her actions. God uses whatever motives she had. I have no idea. We don't, we can only assume what we read, and or go off of what we read. And what we do know is that she was willing to save these two men's life of a nation that was going to annihilate them, and serving a God that was foreign to her, yet all that she had seen made her at least believe in God's power. You know, and because of that, it was, you know, as they say, that's the rest of the story. And so I think that was a very bold move by Fanny to try and do Rahab, because just like you said, if I were to give you different women and you were to say good girl, bad girl, I think a lot of the time Rahab gets thrown over in the,
Yeah.
in the bad girl pile. And so Fanny completed hers, and then I went on to mine, my reflection, my sermon. However long the women go, I adjust mine down, and sometimes it becomes a reflection. And I did Mary and Martha. First reactions.
Typically, people praise Mary and bash Martha, and so to have you, in some ways, explain that what Martha did was good.
Yeah.
It's just what Mary did was better.
Yeah.
I thought last night, if Martha hadn't helped, like Mary didn't help, and they both heard Jesus, and I thought, well, what would be the options? Well, one would be maybe after Jesus talked, they might all get together and see what they can whip up.
Yeah,
I thought about Jesus where he fed the crowds. Maybe
Right.
he just would have fed the people right then and there. And so,
Right.
and yeah, I kind of wonder what would have happened if both of them had stood at Jesus' feet.
Yeah, I took a little different twist. And of course, we're talking about the story when Jesus comes to Bethany and is visiting Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And of course, the story where Mary's at his feet listening, and Martha's in the kitchen, and Martha comes out and just says, you know, hey, Jesus, what's going on here? Tell Mary to help. And I used this phrase, the idea that Mary did the best thing at the right time, and Martha did the right thing at the wrong time. And when I was writing it, I was thinking, it is very easy to say, look at Mary, and come on, Martha. And Jesus even says at that time, you know, there are very few things. This is one of them that I want you to do. And yet so many. Why do you think that is?
We have maybe a code or just different rules of what's proper.
Gift of hospitality.
Yeah. And so what Martha was wanting to do is not incorrect or improper. It's just
Right.
she did what a good guest would do, and and she wanted Mary to help her out. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, on the surface, yeah, I would think that if I was in Martha's shoes, I'd be wanting some help.
Do you think, and here's where we jump into the land of assumption, do you think Martha was jealous of Mary? I mean, could that have been it? You know, Mary did, or do you think it was more of, I'm working my tail off, and you're sitting there just lounging at the feet of Jesus?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot to be done. So, I mean, she was just
Well,
thinking,
yeah.
you know, I can't do all this, and I need some help. And so there may be some jealousy, but I think it's more frustration that
Right.
she was working her tail off, and her sister wasn't
Right.
helping out, so she was slacking.
Right. Yeah. And so I do the sermon and got more than a couple comments both ways.
Yeah.
The idea of you're too hard on Martha, you're too easy on Martha, you were too hard on Mary, you're too easy on Mary. Never thought of it that way. Not quite sure that's the way the story goes.
Yeah.
I mean, all of those things. But I think the one thing that we learn from that is, and one of the things that I said is, so many people want to make that scripture about our giftedness, that we work in the area that we're we're gifted in, that God says, okay, he's given us a talent for hospitality, a gift of hospitality. He's given us worship, the Paul, the Timothy, all of those things. And my comment was, that's not what the scripture is about. This scripture is about Jesus saying, at this time, in this particular place, Mary's right, Martha, what you're doing is good and proper, but at some time, the good and the proper has to fall underneath me. I mean, I think that's what the scripture is saying. And the idea, if you want to stretch it out, is the idea of so many times I think we can replace one for the other, that our work becomes more important than our worship. I made that comment, and I fall into the trap all the time. Are the lights right? Is the sound right? Did the slide come on at the right time? And after studying that, thinking to myself, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. That a slide popping up 2 seconds late can somehow supersede my worship on Sunday. And when I step back from a perspective and look at it through that lens, I seem ridiculous. And I wonder how often we do that.
It's easy to. We want to get everything to work out, and when things don't fall into place, we agonize over it. And those things are important, but you're right. The most important thing with worship is us worshiping God.
Right.
And all those other things can lead to it, but the most important part is that actual act of worship.
Yes, and the audacity of me imposing upon you as a congregational member to think that because the slide was 2 seconds late, or the music was an eighth of a note off, or I stumbled in reading the scripture, or my sermon was 5 minutes late, 5 minutes too short. The audacity of me to think that I have the power to affect your worship.
Well, and
such an audacity.
Sometimes when things don't go as planned, it can be God's way of resetting us. I remember there's times that I've sang where started off pretty rough. I had one funeral I sang at where Kermit the Frog sang for a whole verse and a half, and I should have just stopped and cleared my throat, but sometimes those are the reminder that what am I here to do, and what's the focus need to be. And so sometimes those things can kind of reset us and remind us that this is a moment with God, and if people are there, then we know they're there, but the focus really is us and God.
That is it, and I think we miss that focus because and like I said, I'm at the top of the list of this blame part. This whole idea that says worship has become a performance, and pastors fall into that. Everybody does. Worship leaders, song leaders. Of course, you want to do a good job. I know Christine is that way. My wife is that way too when she sings. It's like, no, I don't know that song. I don't want to. And when it comes to areas that I don't know, like singing, I'm totally different. I'm just like, get up there and just sing. Give praise to God. Who cares what you sound like? Yet if somebody were to say to me, doesn't matter what the sermon is like, just do your best, I would think, you've got to be kidding me. And so there is a lot of hypocrisy and wrong vision. I play out the Martha so much when God is just saying, just sit, Jesus is saying, sit at my feet and worship me. Just worship me. Is that too much to ask? And I say, yeah, no, not as long as the sermon's good and the songs are great. And, and so I learned a lot from doing that, saw something in that story that I believe is there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have preached it. But I think is there that I think we miss. So yeah, two kind of different women of the Bible that now this coming week, and we'll be talking about, this will be the last time that one of the women of our church get up and talk about a woman, but they match this time.
Oh.
It's the woman with the 2 coins. It's the widow's mite. That's the story. And as soon as we're done with this podcast, I'm going to take a few minutes of your time and run by you an idea. That will play out next week.
Wow.
And I think it's either going to be one of the things that you look at or that you listen to and say, I never thought of that. Or it's going to be one of those things that you look at and say, man, were you off? That is not what that story is about. So, Rahab, good girl and bad girl? Mostly good girl now?
There's some bad girl, but with the bad girl, knowing that, she didn't have a choice in the matter, then maybe it wasn't so much a bad girl, but just put in a bad situation.
Right. Yeah, and we talk a lot about that. I mean, there is that idea of we look at the situations that we're in. I mean, we talked about Hagar not long ago. I mean, look at these positions that they're in. And I think sometimes we expect them to just, they're in the Bible. They're a woman of the Bible. They've got to be this pillar of faith. They've got, it doesn't matter what you put them in. We talked about Miriam, that whole idea that even in the midst of seeing all that God was doing, she still questioned the hierarchy of, they're put in situations that if we were to say, if I put you in that position, how would you respond? And of course, I think we would probably all respond the way that they did. And so it's really one of those, things, I think, that I think sometimes, and I think this is true, I think sometimes we are too easy on the people in the Bible, and I think we are sometimes too hard on them. But next week, we're going to do the last one for the women, and then we'll finish off on Palm Sunday with, when you're talking about women of the Bible, if you start with Eve, you have to end with Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so we'll end that on Palm Sunday and move on from that. So it'll be interesting. We want to encourage everybody who's listening in their Lenten walk, how Lent is going. We had an elders meeting, and I thought that Esther brought a great question to the table, the idea of where are you at and what has this Lenten season meant or done for you. And I really thought that the answers were fascinating. But I mean, if you were to share, I know what you shared, and I don't want to share what you shared at the elders meeting. I wanted to give you the last word. What have you learned this Lenten season?
I'm not enough. God is.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. That whole idea that, and I would piggyback on that and say, in this Lenten season, which I'm trying to do a totally different way, I have had that realization more and more that it's not about me. It's all about God. I'm not enough. He's more than enough. And without him, I'm nothing. And believe, that's hard for me. I don't have a humble bone in my body. I mean, I'll be the first one to say it. When God was handing out humility, I forgot to get in line. It's one of my faults. I know it. People tell it to, not that I'm arrogant in that type of, but I just really don't. I think it's been very hard in my life to get to a point to be able to say, yeah, without God, I'm not anything. It's hard to say, but that's something that I've been learning during Lent, and we hope that you are making your journey to the cross and finally to the empty tomb as we celebrate Easter. That Lent this year as something different and something. I keep getting the word revelatory. That whole idea. So. We'll see what happens next week. I'm excited to hear what you think, and actually the word you hear. I've gone over it with Christine. It was a bumpy road. So we'll see where we get. So we want to encourage you, if you don't have a church, Emmanuel Mennonite, 9:30 every Sunday morning here at 5th and Harriet in La Junta, Colorado. For those of you who are elsewhere, who are watching this in other states, we want to wish you a good Sunday and tell you how much we appreciate you watching the podcast and supporting us. If you haven't, go down, hit that subscribe button and a little notification bell, and anytime we come on, you'll know that we're here. You will know that we are here doing a show. So for everybody here at Emmanuel Mennonite, for Mark, for myself, we want to wish you a very, very happy Sunday and encourage you in your Lenten journey as we work our way to Easter. We'll see you next week. God bless. Let me get over here.